Good afternoon. It is 1 p.m. I'd like to call the February 4th, 2025 Town Council meeting to order. I ask everyone to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Bell?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Berner?
Here.
Mr. Farrell?
Here.
Ms. Kay?
Here.
Mr. Spencer?
Here.
Ms. Tillerson?
Here.
Mr. McQuillan?
Here.
And company?
Thank you. First agenda item of business is the approval of the minutes. Those were circulated to council members in advance. There's some minutes for our last council meeting on January 7th. Are there any changes to the minutes?
Not from me.
I gave mine already to Petra.
None for me, thank you.
And with the changes provided by Councilmember Kay, the minutes are deemed approved. Next agenda item, citizen comments. This is first citizen comments on agenda items only. Anybody volunteering? Okay. Moving on to updates. I'll start. I first hope everybody survived Snowmageddon. There have been, I just want to commend the town, Kika, and contracted folks that we had lined up for clearing our roads as quickly as they did. Having come from the north and lived for the last 4 decades in D.C. and prior to that in garden spots like North Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas, I probably had an unrealistic expectation at the outset about how we and everyone else would respond to this event. And I soon understood that things are a little bit different here, and it's a 1 to 5 or 10 or even more event, particularly when I was on a call with all the emergency operations folks from Charleston County, coordinated by Charleston County, and they were talking about the fact that they only had 10 trucks for the entire county. So that put things in a little bit of perspective. So we were able to get our main roads cleared fairly quickly. What we also learned at our home, I hope nobody else had similar problems, is you have metal seam roofs here, but you don't have the little snow angels at the edge of the roofs that we do up north. So a lot of snow and ice sliding down. And I understand some people in our neighborhood had some damages. I hope that wasn't widespread. Again, I want to commend the town and Kika particularly for their response. Also, we had the help of CCSO on, I think it was the Thursday morning after the storm, where we had a significant black ice problem on Kiowa Island Parkway that necessitated basically blocking off the parkway for about an hour or so until that was able to melt. But fortunately, nobody was hurt. Second item of business, we had a delayed set of strategic planning meetings. They were supposed to occur the week before last. Council met for 2 days last week. A few of you were in this room were in attendance. Appreciate that. If you haven't had a chance to view those and you've got a few hours to kill or you want to rush through them, the council members covered an awful lot of territory. I commend to your attention a lot of the issues that we are looking at and we'll be addressing over the course of 2025. I addressed some of those issues as well as a few others in the town hall meeting I hosted last week. Both of those are viewable on the town's YouTube website. I would note that the agenda today, blessedly, is somewhat light. Both the holidays as well as the storm pushed back consideration of a couple of things that would otherwise probably have been on the agenda today. Rest assured, the tempo is going to pick up a little bit starting with the March council meeting, and I suspect thereafter we'll have a few matters, many more matters that we will be addressing. As you may be aware, I'm not sure this has been broadly communicated, and council, you can confirm exactly what the status is, but we've had the long in gestation mediation agreement that was entered into last October, and it took a while for all the documents that needed to be attached to the 2 or 3 pages of words that were on the page in that mediation agreement to be all the dots to be connected, T's crossed and I's dotted. As of this past Monday, there was an agreed upon consent order that was filed by the court. I don't know if the judge has actually issued anything yet.
Yeah, I don't know that the judge has approved it yet, but it has been submitted to the court for approval with the consent of both parties.
And I certainly anticipate having conversations with the club in the very near future about a timing with regard to opening up the Cape Club and the beach cottages. As I had indicated back in October, once the consent order was agreed to and we had everything in place, the town would be prepared to issue a temporary certificate of occupancy, assuming we could deal with some operational and temporary parking issues, and that's what will have to be discussed in the relatively near future, but I trust that those issues can be worked out. Just a couple of development-related activities, items on and off island. On island, I was at the Nest not that long ago and saw the signs for the activities building. I see Mr. Warren here. He can confirm whether in fact this is still on schedule, but it said projected opening of the new activity center in 2025. Yes. We also understand that Seafields is proceeding apace. As many of you know, that's now owned by Bishop Gadsden. We'll have a meeting this Friday. Some of the town leadership will have a meeting with the Bishop Gadsden leadership to get a little bit more information, but the expected opening of that is also in 2025. For those of you who may be interested, there is a community drop-in meeting later this afternoon or early this evening. I believe it is at Berkeley Electric for the Orange Hill project. So this is a community drop-in that the partners will be hosting. I don't know, Mark, are you and others, Amanda may be there or not, but this is a precursor to a subsequent county workshop, I believe, the next week. So please, if you have an opportunity, go up and attend that and see what revisions have been made. On Thursday, there will be a staff briefing on the much delayed Main Road Corridor C project. So if you're familiar with the 3 segments, A, B, and C, all along Main Road from Savannah Highway down to the intersection of River, Betsy Carrison, and Bo Hickett, the Main Road, the segment A, which is the flyover at Savannah Highway, that project is now in process. Segment B's basically been dropped for some period of time. There were fairly significant plans with regard to segment C. We'll hear what the latest staff updates are. As you know, that's been several years in gestation with a number of alternatives. Unfortunately, at least from my standpoint, and I think from our community standpoint, is the indications are that that project, segment C corridor improvements, are going to be scaled back. The last thing that was put out by the staff was already scaled back from a lot of the original iterations, and it may be further scaled back, or, if worst case scenario, dropped altogether. Which would be unfortunate. What that means, no road improvements, certainly from this end of the island up to Maybank Highway. It may be simply that there will be a focus now on the River and Maybank intersection with separate set of funding, and that's not part of this project. That needs to be done, but please, if you have an opportunity, I believe it will be viewable as well. It's this Thursday is the county staff update on the Main Road Corridor project. When we last met, January 7th, we indicated that there was going to be a meeting with regard to the Island Park Place development, the Health and Wellness Village just up the road. That was subsequently deferred and has been deferred again. Nothing further to report on that. The only other item I see, our wildlife biologist here, maybe this will be in the context of the town administrator's update, but I will ask him to give a very brief update. Not now, we don't need to do that now, but in the town administrator's update on coyotes. Councilmember Berner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this last month has been my safety preparedness month. A lot of fun things happened. Just yesterday, we had our first CERT meeting of the year, which is the Community Emergency Response Team. What came out of that, we have 2 new members with a service dog, which is just awesome. We now have a dog that is trained and certified to assist in servicing lost people or cadavers if need be. Moving forward, though, we have training coming up in March, and we're going to be moving to have everybody on CERT to be not just trained for their emergency response, but also for CPR training. So full speed ahead with the CERT group here. I'm very excited. We're going to become a really good organization. Out of last week's retreat came another safety awareness issue with respect to tabletop training. We, every year annually, do a hurricane tabletop drill with all the emergency people, EMS, fire, police, people on the island, et cetera, for hurricanes. It's quite fun and quite learning and informative, and really gets us to practice what to do in a case of emergency. But what came to mind just last week is we have not performed a tabletop exercise for events that are not forecasted. Tornadoes, earthquakes, or something to that note. So what came note of all that is, well, what do we do? How's the command structure going to flow down? How's the command going to be orchestrated? Who's in charge? Who's not in charge? So due to that great observation, we are now going through the details to figure out what to do with an unforecasted event. Another example is the Kiowa Island Bridge is washed out. Ooh, what do we do? Now, we do have a contract for a replacement bridge, but until the replacement bridge comes in, what do we do to temporarily get people across the river? We're working towards this now, but that was a wonderful discovery that we had during the retreat, and we're working towards that. Last thing on my list is, again, in the safety preparedness category, is the mayor and I are going to be meeting with the new sheriff next week, again, to see where his head is and see how he's going to assist us in keeping the island safe and the bad guys away. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Councilmember Berner. Councilmember Kay.
Okay, thanks. I have a couple of updates. First off, we have been working at revising the Environmental Committee, and the current permutation is that we'll be split it into 2 parts. One will be focused on wildlife and resiliency. One will be wildlife, the second one will be resiliency. We're going to be working with our staff of current people who are on the Environmental Committee and separating them out. But the Resiliency Committee is going to have a focus on environmental sustainability, and it's going to focus in on the issues that were identified by the Marsh Management Comprehensive Plan and the Sea Level Rise Report of 2017 or 18. I'm not sure of the final date on that. So anyway, we've got a draft charter out, and Lance and I worked on revisions of that based on scaling down some of the loftier objectives that we presented last week at the retreat, and that draft is now ready to go out to council for review. And then on to bobcats. We're currently working with the Conservancy on a couple of different bobcat initiatives. You all know that there was a significant decline in our bobcat population due to the second generation anticoagulants. And because of that, we've got to increase the community awareness and the focus on bringing those bobcat numbers back up to their healthy levels from a couple of years ago. So we want to work on the Bobcat Pledge, bringing some revised attention to that and restoring healthier numbers of that population. Next, I was going to talk about coyotes, but I don't want to turf Jim. So would this be an appropriate time for Jim?
Well, that's fine, and if you have some specific issues to raise or
Actually, I wanted to commend Jim and his troops on the coyote management plan that was put together in record speed, and I have had so much feedback from the community on the information contained in it, the helpfulness of it, the education, the coyote mapping. We even got a letter from the Humane Society that commended the town biology staff on their whole approach to this management plan. It was really, really very well done. I was going to talk about the coyote population that we know exists, but you're a much better person to talk about that.
And Jim, while you're at it, just but just maybe just a brief update on what we've done since we drafted the coyote management plan, had the 2 public meetings, specific action steps taken, and what we've gotten in terms of actual reports of sightings since that time.
Yep, sure. So absolutely. So as everyone is probably aware, we've had coyotes on the island for a number of years. In December and up through mid-January, we started to have reports, mainly from Ocean Park, of a coyote out during the day. There were some concerns. And so, that led us to formalize our coyote management plan and then undertake a number of actions. And so, obviously one of the first things we did was begin to step up our presence in the area. So between wildlife staff, as well as code enforcement, public safety staff from the town, we increased our patrolling, especially in the Ocean Park area, but throughout the island, just to try to, catch a glimpse of the coyote and better understand what was going on out there. We also unveiled a public reporting form for folks to report sightings of coyotes. And so far, since May, we unveiled the form, I think in December, but we had some reports, historic reports entered. But we've had 49 coyote sightings entered into that. 39 of those were in the month of January. We haven't had any in February so far. A lot of the majority of the 39 sightings in January were in Ocean Park. A lot of those during the day. Since January 10th, we've only had 1 daytime sighting of a coyote in Ocean Park, and that was on January 20th. So, what appears to be going on is exactly what we kind of hypothesized, which is, you're kind of at the start of the breeding season for coyotes now. That's when coyote movements peak. Coyotes are moving around looking for mates. We're getting bumped out of territories and moving around, and so you see a lot of activity. So it would appear that this coyote has perhaps moved on, but we continue to monitor the sightings. In the coyote management plan, it calls for us to, when we have a coyote that appears to maybe be losing its fear of people, to take a little bit more of an aggressive hazing action. We've only attempted to do that once because we've only been able to see a coyote during the day one time on January 20th, but we were not able to actually do the enhanced hazing because the coyote ran away very quickly. And so I guess the other couple things is we've launched a Living with Coyotes webpage, which is online now. You can go there to access not only the sighting form, but also a map of all the sightings across the island by date and time. And then I guess the last thing on coyotes is we're about to start trapping bobcats and coyotes on February 17th. And so our plan is to hopefully put collars on a couple of coyotes, 2 to 4, and try to better understand, how many there are, where they're living, when they're active, and just better understand how we can continue to, coexist, moving forward.
Jim, I believe you've got a report on this. My neighbor said they did. I know a lot of focus has been on Ocean Park, but they're up near Inlet Cove and Captain Sam's also. We hear them and see them.
Yes, sir. We've certainly, after the sightings kind of dissipated in Ocean Park, we started to see some additional sightings on the west end and around Sore Rail. Some of that was daytime activity. That seems to have gone away at least, so potentially that very active coyote that was in Ocean Park moved down to the west end, and may or may not still be around, but certainly isn't as visible right now. But yeah, we do have sightings. If you look at the map online, we have sightings across the island, but 75% are on the eastern end, at least at this point.
Jim, real briefly, just talk about the numbers and talk about the range and where we've seen their tagged coyotes.
Sure. Yeah. So, it's tough to estimate, a lot of different wildlife populations. They're, hard to see, hard to count. But based on historic tracking data, and the typical home range size of a coyote in our type of an ecosystem, it's likely that Kiowa is supporting 2 residential pairs of coyotes. So that's 4 coyotes that are always here. They're going to have offspring. There'll be transients that move through. So, my current estimate of coyote population size is 4 to 10. It's going to go up and down some, depending on birth rates and dispersal and mortalities, but should remain stable, as long as we have those, likely 2 dominant pairs in place. We've attempted to gather data on coyote movements, going all the way back to 2013 when coyotes first showed up. We were able to collar 2 back in 2013, 1 in 2013 and 1 in 2014. And then as coyotes kind of disappeared for a number of years, at the same time our our bobcat numbers crashed because of SGAs, but they've come back in the last couple of years. So last year we were able to catch 2 coyotes and put GPS collars on them. The first one we collared was a female that we collared out on Little Bear Island on the far eastern end. She roamed about half of the island for 3 months, and then she left. She went all the way up through Johns Island, all the way up to the Round Holiday Inn, and then the last time we got a signal from her, she was near Charlestown Landing in West Ashley. The male that we caught on Captain Sam's, within 3 days he left. He went almost to Walterboro, and then over to Ridgeville, and then back down to International Parkway, where he lived across from Boeing on the left there, if you're headed towards the airport, for about 7 or 8 months, until he was shot and killed on December 29th. So just goes to show you, how large the movements of especially transient coyotes can be, and just, kind of further gives credit to the, if there's a void in the ecosystem, a coyote is likely moving around and going to find it. So, that's why, lethal control doesn't work, because you've got so many of these transients moving around.
Thank you.
So Jim, one comment I wanted, or not comment, I just wanted you to let the community know, was I had asked you, he said, what population size could we support? And I think you indicated 4 to 10.
Yep. I mean, it's, like most predatory species, alligators are another great example. There will be as many of them in the area as the ecosystem can support. And so, and likely that's 2 pairs of coyotes. And so, I think we're to the point now where the population is stabilized. We kind of had a little bit of an uptick as they kind of moved back in after the numbers being way down. But I think we're probably what is a stable population and likely where we'll stay going forward. So 4 to 10, but again, it's going to go up and down a little bit. That could change in the future, but probably not.
Thank you.
Jim, would it be fair to say that our coyote, this kind of the stable coyote population, what the ecosystem can support, is perhaps a little less here than it might be at other places, in part because of our bobcat population, since they are basically going after much of the same food source?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's there's a lot of factors that go into how many animals can live in a single location, and certainly competition for food resources is one of them. And so, yep, that certainly plays a role. But, coyotes are here to stay. They're across the entire country, and, you know, we'll learn to live with them for sure.
Thank you.
Jim. Sure.
Okay, a couple of other things. The work on the pervious surface initiative continues. This is a complicated issue. There are new options for different surfaces that are popping up monthly. John's just sent me, I think it was one out of Mount Pleasant yesterday. So there's a lot of work going on in the industry to provide a lot of different options. Right now, the Planning Commission is working hard on putting all that information together. They've got a meeting tomorrow, presentations by 3 different contractors, so I'm going to be at that meeting. I think, Lance, you're going to be there as well. And so we're getting ourselves better educated, better informed every month. And we will then come back, study what the Planning Commission comes up with, and then follow through with some recommendations to council. And then just a quick update, you guys, this is just interesting. We have a vacancy for a communications director, and we have had now 230 plus applications for that job. I wouldn't have guessed that it would be that high.
Not 230 that are necessarily qualified.
We were able to go through several of them kind of quickly, but there are some good candidates. And then finally, this is just the Mad K wish list. I would like us to think about what we do with the town website in terms of a revisit of that site. We are really fortunate to have a community that's really engaged and really passionate and is willing to do a lot of research. And you know, that's a blessing and a curse, Carol. But I think that we owe the community a website that can be easily navigated. It's sometimes difficult to just try to find an ordinance. So I would hope that there would be a search function where I could type in beach management and it could quickly take me there. And I'm sure some of you have had the same frustrations with working through the site. I think the town deserves a state-of-the-art website. And I would like the council to think about it. Let me know your thoughts, please, on whether or not you think we need to go back to the drawing board and start over again, or if our approach is going to be more of a fix-it. My opinion over the last couple of years is that attempts to do a patchwork kind of fix haven't been successful. I'm of the opinion that we need to start over. But I would appreciate reactions by the rest of council. Lance, you're shaking your head.
Yes. Both as a community member, as a council member, I've been frustrated trying to navigate content and find things on the website. I've actually met with Stephanie and Shai to discuss some of my thoughts on it. I'm of the mind that we're trying to make a bad platform work, and there's probably better platforms out there for the kind of website and service we need to provide to the community. So my recommendation is we get some demos and get smart on what, and I'm happy to be part of that. And I've got some background in that, and look at what might serve our community best. We've got budget season coming up soon, so if we foresee expense transitioning to a new platform, this would be a good time to understand that better, I think, and go forward.
Thank you.
Good.
Okay.
Councilmember Farrell.
So budget season is here. It's not upcoming, it's actually here.
It's here.
Yeah, we are in the beginning of budget season. The great news is we have a very healthy budget, growing revenues, growing income, but at the same time, we need to prudently manage that. And importantly, philosophically, we need to decide what we want to do with that. I mean, we've got reserves of over $40 million, and our assets don't require to have that large a reserve, so we need to decide what we need to do and how we need to do it. And to that end, the mayor's asked me to look at kind of capital projects and begin a list of prioritization capital projects, do a reserve analysis. And again, our reserves are a bit different from Kika's in that we don't have a lot of assets to reserve for. And then the other thing is, we have a very healthy balance sheet, so to the extent we wanted to do something and finance it, we'd have a high credit quality, that would lead to low financing rates. So instead of spending money, we could keep our money in the bank and we could borrow money. So it's just another option we have, another tool in our toolkit. So I'm going to be exploring our financing options in the very near future. Number two, we are in the committee restocking season, if you will. You see there's a long list of committee reappointments. Dorada and I have spent a lot of time over the past month in looking at committee members, looking where we have needs, looking where we have diversification needs. And the good news, at least for me, in working with both the Audit Committee and the State Accommodation Tax Committee, is we have some great folks on there, and we've got some great volunteers who've stepped up at the end of the year and want to help some more. So we've got, I think, some really good news about kind of the committee restocking. Part of that is, one of the committees is, again, the state accommodation tax. There are a lot of potential projects we have already in kind of the works we've been doing for year in and year out. And we really want to expand that opportunity set, looking for new places where we can help folks increase tourism, different avenues, different ideas, different groups that we can fund. Again, our state accommodation tax budget is, again, robust. And we want to look at really good ways to spend that money to make this a better place for tourists and have them have a better experience. And I think the last thing is just a strategic planning session. We did have a great strategic planning session. For me, the stuff that we talked about touched on all of these issues, whether it's state accommodation, whether it's reserves, whether it's capital projects, and certainly budgeting and the health of the town. So we're looking for, again, ways to be prudent about our expenditures, but make sure that we have a vision and have a philosophy about how we're going to spend our money going forward, and not spend it willy-nilly, but have a plan to do this, but always stay very financially healthy so that we do have a lot of funds for that kind of rainy day fund, if you will, in case something happened, given where we live on the coast. So that's it for me, Mr. Mayor.
I have a question, please, and it may be actually for Dorada. Previous budgets, or you just mentioned we have a healthy budget and revenues were increasing, which is why, this is where my question is coming from.
Yeah.
Because I remember Dorada in previous budget cycles had a graph forecasting revenue going down because new construction is coming to the end. Is there a change in what we've discussed in the past?
So when we look at this, you're talking about building permits revenue.
Yes.
But a year ago, or not even a year ago, council approved increase in the building permit fees. So you actually will see not a raise, but compared to last year, we collecting like 75% more than what we've done on the old fees.
Okay, because I remember visually in my mind, there
Correct,
was a graph
correct.
showing the revenues
Yes.
going down.
That was the
But
case.
because of what you just said, that's not going to happen.
No, because we increased the fees.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that, because,
Correct.
all right, I heard you.
I think just perhaps one clarification, and it depends over what period of time. Our revenues associated with development fees right now are going up because we increase the fee
Correct.
amount. Going forward, as primary development ends, you will probably see some decrease
Yeah.
in that revenue source. It will never go to zero because you'll still have additions and
course.
renovations and tear downs, what have you. But that particular revenue source is likely to go down over a period of time.
I know, my
Yeah,
comment
yeah.
was,
Correct.
Mr. Farrell said the revenue is going up, and I just remember previous budget cycles, we believed as a town council, the revenue was going to go down, and I wanted to follow up on that.
Well, and there's, revenues have been going up somewhat for a couple of reasons. What has been increasing at a much greater pace is our reserves.
Yes.
Yeah, for a number of different reasons.
Thank you.
And Councilman Berner, revenues is one part. There's two other important parts. One is the state accommodation tax
Well, of course,
receipts.
yes, but
And the
that's
other
just a pass-through, we don't,
It has an increasingly larger and larger effect. The other thing is something we haven't experienced, except for maybe last year, is our income, our interest on income. So if you think about what's happening with Fed funds, we're about 5% in Fed funds. That's yielding us on $40 million, about $2 million a year in interest income. Now, if you go back 5 years, that number was close to zero.
Correct.
So it's gone up pretty dramatically. It'll probably be relatively stable going forward for the next year or two, but you could see that come down as well. You could see it go up, but the likelihood is it comes down gradually over time.
All right, so I guess
three
what I'm hearing,
pieces.
I guess what I'm hearing is that our revenue going forward is not going to be decreasing, it's going to be at least stable, is my takeaway from this discussion.
Over the longer term, I think it would be fair to say that of our operating revenue sources, not accommodations or hospitality tax related, our largest source of operating revenues, unrestricted revenues, is development or building permit fees. Is that a bit, that's higher than license fees or building permit fees is the largest, right? Yeah, so it's the largest single source. So all things being equal, the operating revenues, unrestricted revenues, if you didn't make any other adjustments, could well go down a little bit in the future. However, depending what happens with accommodation taxes, the first, for example, the state accommodations tax, right now, about 175,000 of that immediately it goes over into the unrestricted revenue pool.
Right.
And there are levers you can pull with regard to other unrestricted revenues as well. But it is likely to be the case, absent a significant further increase in the fee level, that their principal source of unrestricted revenues will go down by some amount in the future.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I just wanted to get that clear.
And maybe if I may, one last thing, so we don't beat a dead horse too long, is there's think about three levers. The important thing to know right now is all three levers are working well. That may not always be the case, as we're talking about. But today, all three levers are working well, and it's important for us to think about what we do need to bank for a rainy day, what we do need to bank for when revenues do roll over in one or two of the legs, and what our desires and wishes are and how we should deploy our assets.
Right.
So it's a multivariable equation we've had to think about, and it's really important. But today, we're in very good health, and it's a great place to start from rather than starting from a bad place.
Absolutely. Great, thank you.
Councilmember Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor Belt. So we're finalizing meetings with the cellular providers. The Infrastructure and Public Works Committee was, the charter was approved last council meeting. We'll go through members today. Broad oversight and involvement in various service providers, utility projects, infrastructure projects, things like that. The one we've hit the hardest earliest was the cellular coverage, just because that was an easy one to jump on quickly. So we're finalizing meetings with the three cellular providers. Have gotten very good responses. Was on the phone quite a bit this morning with one of them, who was, just want to make sure that they're hitting the target with the meeting. But they all seem very interested in looking for ways to improve Kiwa's coverage. So we'll find out, what they need from us and what they can do for us as we go through it. One spinoff of that, and the mayor just approved this, I believe, last week, is for public safety communications. Public safety communications now, even though you see people with radios, it's really over cellular. And one of the things came out in 9/11 was capacity, interoperability, and priority and preemption for first responders to be able to work together. So there's a U.S. government network called FirstNet that's available for state, local, and federal eligible first responders and officials and things like that. The town's going to transition to that. Charleston County's on it. St. John's Fire Department's on it. FEMA's on it. It comes with priority preemption for cellular coverage for devices, call fire for a firefighter, maybe equipment in their helmet, things like that, as well as a specialized app store for emergency operations and first response. So there's going to be more to come on that. I'll continue to work with you, Russ, on how do we take advantage of that once we kind of had to get through the decision the mayor did last week. And, now how do we best take advantage of that and work through it? So we're kind of starting to turn the corner on that right now. One of the things I asked the mayor if I could get us more involved in is a concept called, and we talked about this a little bit last week, is net zero stormwater management. It's a best practice for many communities, especially coastal communities. And the basic premise is that as you develop a piece of property, you can't make your stormwater problem somebody else's. That's kind of in a nutshell. And so it feeds into a lot of things. It feeds into the marsh management, it feeds into erosion, it fits into a lot of different things. But typically, stormwater is a public works thing. So Brian and I were like, hey, we want to dig into this one, see if there's something we can accomplish here based off of best practices other communities have done. Met with key staff 2 weeks ago. Turns out we've actually got an ordinance that's been through first reading that seems to have not gotten to second reading. It was passed 4-0 in July with one council member absent. So I encourage us to try to get that on the March agenda for a second reading. We could do the public hearing notifications and all that, but I think that could be something that can really help the community. Back to the sustainability and resiliency as well that Councilmember Kay brought up. So that would be something I'd encourage us to fast track now that we've been through some successful reviews already.
Thank you, Councilmember Spencer. Stephanie?
Thanks.
Just have a few things. Wanted to piggyback on the fact with regards to the budget process. Yes, Dorota and I have essentially kicked off with regards to the fiscal year 26 budget process. The department has essentially get us their information, goes to the mayor, and I also get a copy. We then will pull that information together. Then, of course, Lucas will be involved in that process. Right now, it's anticipated that you will see a first draft at the March meeting. And normally that starts at the Ways and Means, so we would probably have both of you all at that meeting as well. So that fiscal year 26 budget process through the Finance Director, Dorota, and we have started that process. So it is definitely, as Councilmember Farrell said, and Mayor Belt said, it's definitely along the path and on the process. Just 2 additional updates that I would like to provide. Everyone on the community may be interested in this, and this falls into the Building Services Department. This is in regard to the 2 projects on Beachwalker Drive, Ocean Pines, the lower part, that the Building Department, there's a number always times back and forth between reviewing the building drawings, going back to the architect, et cetera, going back and forth. The building services have received some revised drawings, and so for Ocean Pines, so they're probably fairly, I don't want to say close, because close can, that can be however long, but they're reviewing the revised building drawings. And then the west end, which is the upper part of Beachwalker Drive, those are still under review. They really just started that process, and they're probably still about, I'd say, 30, 45 days out before they're willing to sign off. So just letting everyone know that those drawings are under the review by the Building Services Department. And then, just as a reminder, with regards to Bobcat Pledge, Jim and I was on a call with Clemson, which is the regulatory agency with regards to the second generation anticoagulants, SGAs. And one of the things is that they had putting in a requirement that would, was it to restrict, Jim? I don't recall. Is it to, not restrict, but what is the? It would make it a restricted use pesticide. A restricted use pesticide for essentially individuals that's not licensed. So there still be allowed, as I understand, through the companies that essentially are licensed to be able to use that chemical, but it would be like if you go into, say, Ace Hardware, someone can't just go and buy that product off the shelf. One of the interesting things in regards to that meeting, because they had a meeting, it really was for the regulatory or the agencies that use that application and allow them, it was like a public meeting, But one of the things that we heard a lot, unfortunately, was this is a Kiowa problem, and why is the state regulatory agency making this requirement statewide? Well, it's just not a Kiowa issue. Through the student that's working with Jim and the PhD program, identified that there's a bobcat that they discovered that had the same issue in Newberry. So it's obviously in the upstate, but they were focused more on Kiowa. And interesting enough, someone said, if the residents of Kiowa don't care, because they looked at who signed the Bobcat Pledge. So they're trying to link it to, in addition, why should we care if the residents on Kiowa don't care? Because look at how many have pledged. So we're going to look for ways to really push and encourage owners to sign. I know it may be a little confusing because when we first kicked this off, we had a lot of participation. It went a couple years and we decided to re-push it out. I think some residents felt like, well, I signed it the first time, does that mean I have to sign it again? So we're going to find ways to continuously push it out, to get people, to encourage people to sign this. We do think that the state's going to still move forward with regards to this restriction, but those are just some of the conversations that they centered on, those agencies that would be regulated through this new restriction. So that was an interesting conversation. And from there, the only other thing is that I just want to let you all know that charitable contributions that we do every year that council has so graciously put into the budget. We received a number of applications. We are prepared to do the same way, where we have some staff members who have stepped up. They're going to volunteer. They're going to go out. They're going to interview. And then ultimately, we're going to come back and make, obviously, just a recommendation that goes to Ways and Means and Council. That should be coming in April. So we're really excited that we'll be able to go back out into the community and just kind of hear from proposed agencies that are looking for grant funding from the town. So we've kicked off that process. And that's all I have.
Any questions for the town administrator?
Nope. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. No items of old business. First item of new business is consider approval of ordinance 2025-01. This is an amendment to Chapter 5 of the Beach Management Ordinance, which is labeled Control of Pets. This is not what has long been discussed, which is making broad changes into the off-leash rules on the beach. This is very narrow, as Jim will explain, very, very narrow change at this point in time. I just want to make very clear that this does not mean that we will not be addressing, in fact, we will be addressing the other issues that are long in gestation. Those may come up in the March council meeting. Part of what we are looking at in the context of all those changes that have been discussed regarding suitable nesting habitat, off-leash areas, particularly over towards the ocean course, is that there are some other changes that we need to look at in the beach management ordinance itself, and we'd like to have those all kind of tightened up and put together at one time. So that's what's delayed things a little bit. But Jim, you might describe this. It shouldn't take long. It's
Nope,
a very narrow change.
Should not take long. You know, as the mayor explained, you know, the environmental committee has been looking at kind of the issue of, you know, pet restraint on the beach, critical habitat impacts to shorebirds for a year now. You know, we've kind of, as he indicated, you know, we're now looking at the entire beach management Article 16, because there's a lot of things that need to be fixed. And so there'll be more things down the road, but for now, we just wanted to attempt to address a pretty significant issue that we have, which is, you know, the impacts of particularly off-leash dogs on the endangered or threatened species, the red knot, that come to our beaches in large numbers, typically around March 1st. You know, the Kiowa beaches, Kiowa and Seabrook beaches together host about 40% of the entire eastern population of red knots. And so they're here to feed, they're here to forage, double their body mass, and then fly to the Arctic and breed. So every time they're disturbed, you know, they can't feed, they're burning energy, and it decreases their survival. So kind of a quick rifle shot fix to try to address that was to simply adjust the off-leash time period for well, all of the beach, except for, obviously, this doesn't impact critical habitat where dogs are never allowed. It also does not impact the current dog use area where dogs are allowed off-leash year-round. So this would impact the remainder of the beach, our seasonal off-leash area, and it would just shift it back 2 weeks. So the old dates were November 1st through March 15th. And so we're proposing not eliminating any days, just shifting it 2 weeks earlier. So the new dates would be October 16th. Dogs could be off leash. and they'd have to be back on leash. Well, February 28th would be the last day they could be off leash. So starting March 1st, dogs would have to be leashed throughout the seasonal dog leash area. And again, primarily, I mean, almost exclusively to protect migrating red knots, which we know arrive in large numbers typically around March 1st.
Thank you, Jim. May I have a motion for approval of first reading of the ordinance?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? Questions for Jim?
I have one or two, and I don't want to make this a big deal because it's really not. But enforcement is what's on my mind. Jim's done a fabulous job of presenting the danger to the red knots. My perspective of what happens here, I don't particularly think our resident dogs are the issue, but I really think the large problem of the issues are guest dogs. How are we going to enforce the guest dogs? And I'm going to bring this up later when we have the Beach Patrol contract extension to be approved. We need to have a comprehensive plan, because just to have this ordinance to say that you can, we need a comprehensive plan for whether it's going to be part of the birds, part of the beach patrol, part of having an officer. Somehow we have to make sure this is being followed, particularly by the guest dogs. I guess I'm just throwing that out there. We need to have a plan, and we don't have one yet.
Yeah, I think maybe just two things. So we already have plans to step up the presence of our shorebird stewards during this time period. And so.
It was empty.
Yeah, it was.
Thank you.
And so, right, Shorebird Stewards, our voluntary program where they're out on the beach educating and trying to prevent, things, negative encounters between people and dogs and shorebirds. And so that group is already looking at kind of staffing up during this critical time period to try to educate, and then also, document as well as report violations to code enforcement and beach patrol so that they can be addressed. We also plan to have, at least from my department, hopefully potentially public safety as well, just to have additional presence on the beaches during that time period to again, educate, try to get compliance, but enforcement when necessary to make sure that these, this change is being followed. So for this 2-week period in particular.
Great.
Councilmember
Okay,
Bernard, I
thanks.
would just note one thing, and when I talked about kind of the broader review of the Beach Management Act and the Chapter 5 Control of Pets, which is probably mislabeled in some respects, you've identified as really two separate but related issues. One is, what are the rules, or what should the rules be going forward with regard to pets on the beach? And that is part of what we will look at. One of the things that's, for example, been suggested, and maybe this will be something that the council may want to consider, is a registration requirement for
Yeah, I talked about that before.
pets on the beach.
I agree,
But in any sense, we need, what are the rules, or what do we want the rules to be going forward? Then the separate set of issues is, but again, related, is how do we ensure the greatest amount of compliance?
Right,
with
and that's the
this?
bottom
Yeah,
line,
yeah,
is
yeah.
the compliance. So we have to figure out a way to make sure.
And it's a combination, so there is, in a sense, an emerging plan, whether it's all elements of the plan, which includes better education, more staffing, and then we'll look at signage, but then there are some issues okay, how do we make sure that if those aren't working?
Correct.
We get greater compliance through, if necessary, enforcement mechanisms.
And there are some things that are going on too, very much behind the scenes in terms of collecting data. The shorebird stewards, for instance, have got an app on their phone that they can report all sorts of things, and that recently has been expanded. So that we will be provided back with in the department of the biology folks, will be getting much more robust data. And all of that is part of what's going on behind the scenes.
Great.
Any other questions or comments? Call for vote. All in favor of first approving the ordinance on first reading?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you. The second agenda item is approval of ordinance 2025-02. This is the first reading, public hearing and first reading of the tree preservation landscaping standards to establish minimum landscape standards. Do we need to go into public hearing at this point, or? So I would entertain a motion to exit regular business and move into public hearing.
So moved. Second?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're now in public hearing. Petrea, do you want to present
Yeah, thank you.
2025-02?
Yes. So I would like to present this as the Phase 2 of the Landscape and Tree Preservation Ordinance, the first phase being passed in April of last year. So in moving forward with this, we followed the same process that was followed in Phase 1. We worked with a stakeholder work group, met starting in June and met for several months to put together these minimum standards. We looked at the purpose of the ordinance, the applicability of the ordinance, what would be the minimum requirements and procedures for the ordinance, how the ordinance would be implemented, and then the review of special circumstances and variances such as the Tree Preservation Board allows for. Yeah.
From the beginning. And you can either use this.
Yep.
Yeah.
So similar to the first phase, the purpose is very similar, and to consistently preserve and enhance Kiowa's natural environment and to ensure the continuance of the environment and specimen trees and forests that we have, as well as to look at the proper care of trees and shrubs that we're implementing and utilize industry's best standards in that implementation. So the process, again, just to wind back, the initial phase was passed in April of 2024. There was a community open house to educate the public about that. That included mostly just the tree preservation component of the ordinance. And then we instituted the Landscape and Tree Preservation Board. Their first meeting was in June. And we established the Landscape Standards Work Group. So this work group was made up of stakeholders, which included Tree Preservation Board members, the ARB, KICA, the resort, the Kiowa Conservancy, as well as professional landscape architect that works on the island. So we put together this ordinance and presented it to the Landscape and Tree Preservation Board for review and recommendation, and they approved it unanimously in November. It then went to the Planning Commission meeting on December 4th. And so, and it was approved unanimously at the Planning Commission meeting with one amendment, which I'll get to in just a second. So these were factors that were considered during this process. We looked at aligning with the current Designing with Nature existing standards and guidelines. We also wanted to work with and encourage native plants, and also looked at how to advance the town's objective of using native plants and expanding the native grown plant database. How these minimum standards would be reflective in terms of Kiowa Next, the comprehensive plan, as we look forward for the next 10 years. And then also looked at how these standards would be enforced. So in general, I'm going to go through, and then if you have specific questions, we can answer that. But in general, the applicability of the standards include all new construction, remodeling, parking areas, change of use that includes more intensive use, at the addition of any structure, and then also at the request of the planning director, given any special kind of conditions. The amendment that was offered by the Planning Commission initially, it was to not include single-family at this time, since the phase one of the landscape and tree preservation excluded single-family. We went forward with that, and the Planning Commission thought it would be important to include single-family residences that are currently not being reviewed by an ARB. So that would be Eugenia, some homes on Eugenia Avenue, as well as looking forward for future annexation of single families that would not be under an ARB review. It establishes minimum landscape plan requirements that the plans would need to be developed by and signed and sealed by a South Carolina licensed landscape architect. And would include the minimum amount of information that would allow us to review the plans for compliance. In terms of application, the landscape plans would be submitted in the site plan review process and then approved prior to any zoning for permit being issued. Once the plans are approved and construction is complete, the installation of the landscape would need to follow the approved plan. Once it's installed, the landscape architect would need to submit a letter certifying this installation was done to plan, and then that would be tied to the certificate of occupancy for the project.
May I ask a
yes.
question? So just a point of clarification, as a single-family residence, if I were having landscape work done in my house, but the building footprint did not change at all, and but there was a fairly wholesale adjustment of my landscaping, would I need to?
Not currently. These landscape standards being proposed do not apply to single family unless the single family is not under the review by an ARB. That's in alignment with that other part of the ordinance.
Okay, thanks.
And then finally, in terms of installation, maintenance, and replacement, it sets standards to follow current nursery standards in terms of that installation and maintenance. So planting standards, currently we're proposing, and this goes to the native plant requirement, we're proposing that 70% of the shrubs and trees be of native material to the island, and 50% of ground cover be native species to the island. We would require removal of invasive plants as listed on the invasive plant pest species of South Carolina, and no single species shall represent more than 40% to avoid monocultures, especially in canopy trees. We've established minimum sizes, canopy trees, 3-inch caliper, understory or ornamental tree would be an 8-foot height minimum size, evergreen 8 feet, and then shrubs, 50% of the shrubs would be 7-gallon minimum size and 50% would be 3-gallon. We have established minimum lot landscape requirements, and this generated a good bit of discussion, and we tied it back to the preservation standard that was established looking for guidance for mitigation. So one standard, which is also part of the ARB guidelines currently, is if a lot currently has trees, then the minimum lot landscape standards would require that at the completion of the development, 70% of those healthy trees you would have to meet that criteria. Now, in all of these requirements, existing plant material can be counted towards the minimum requirement. And then.
I have another
Yep.
question. It seems like a lot of standards. Do we have the enforcement mechanisms in place to ensure that these standards are met?
Yes, ma'am, I believe we do, especially for everything but single family at this time. Number of these standards that are up here, like the parking standards, we already had. We're just proposing to move it in the ordinance so they're all together. Like the parking standards, the landscape standards were under the parking lot. And so now we're just proposing to move it. Same thing with the compatibility buffer standards.
May I ask a question, please? On the minimum lot landscape requirements, 70% healthy trees, is that caliper or number of trees, or what are you counting there?
That's number of trees. And we have two standards there, because the idea there is that if you have a treed lot, then that would apply. If you have a redevelopment lot where there are not trees there, then the minimum shall be equal to or combined DBH, which is the caliper, greater than or equal to 20 trees per acre or 160 inches per acre, whichever is greater. So that was established in the initial phase, looking at tree preservation and mitigation guidance. So in the initial phase, they ask for a tree preservation plan, and they look at what trees are going to be impacted in which areas, including whether it's in the building footprint or whether it's outside the building footprint, and then they establish that kind of criteria, and so we wanted to align with that. And then finally, we want to encourage and continue to develop the Grow Native Plant database that was started as an initiative a few years ago. Currently, we have about 196 plants in the database. If you go on it, I didn't know this until I started using it more. If you click on the plant, there's a lot more information on different layers of that database. So
Certainly welcome or invite a council member further questions while we're in public hearing, but I would also invite any community comments in public hearing.
So this puts some teeth in our designing with nature philosophy, correct?
correct. It codifies basically the minimum requirements that are established in the guidelines of the design with nature used by the ARB.
That's good.
And
Thanks.
we did work with members of the ARB and KICA in developing these.
Yes, Ms. Gallagher. Oh, Carol Mendorf, I'm sorry. With my glasses, I don't have my long distance glasses. These are only my close glasses.
And they lowered the lights for the
Yep, quick question, but just wondering. Carol Medendorf, Parkside, you keep talking about it not being for single-family homes, but is it for all the regimes? They have to follow all of this then? Is that correct? All the regimes have to do that?
That's correct.
And did you have a regime person on your committee to talk about that?
We did have a number of people that live in regimes that are on the Landscape and Tree Preservation Board.
Great.
I have a question on the ordinance. We have to vote for that first?
Pardon?
You're
Well,
still
we're
in
still in
public
public
hearing. Do you
hearing.
want to go out
Yeah,
of
we're
public
still-
hearing?
We're still in public hearing. Any further citizen comments or council member questions while we're in public hearing? If not, I would entertain a motion to return to regular business.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. What I would like to do at this point in time is suggest without objection, a 5-minute recess.
Okay.
Okay, We have a 5-minute recess. Council may speak. Please speak. return to regular order. We are back in the council meeting. I would entertain a motion to approve on first reading ordinance 2025-02.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion?
I have a I think a typo. On page 1 of 19 of the ordinance, under tree preservation, and this document is set up so that the original type of the document is in black, and the revisions are in red. Under tree preservation, the existing wording says, "The provisions of this article will apply to real property within the municipal limits," blah, 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 comma, excluding single-family residential developments. All right, so it says excluding single-family residential developments. The red line, or the red wording right after that says, "However, the provisions of this article shall apply to single-family residential developments." So one says it doesn't apply, and the other says it does.
That was exactly what Petrea noted, that the original language did not contemplate the fact that, for example, 30 or 40 homes on Eugenia. The reason that there was an exclusion for single family was a lot of people pushed back because they were saying that the ARB already reviews landscape plans in conjunction with a new building, new building or an improvement thereto, and therefore why provide for 2 levels of review. And so that's why the exclusion for single-family residential properties was originally included. Then there was the realization that in fact there are a number of homes, properties on Eugenia particularly, and as Petrea noted, whether there is further development in Freshfields Village or annexation to which this would apply, that the ARB does not have any general covenant jurisdiction over. So therefore, but for the red language, there would be no tree or landscape review at all.
So you don't find this as being a little confusing? And I think we should move to clean it up.
I would not disagree that it is not as well crafted as it might.
That's the only thing I'm saying. I think it's a little circular, so we should strive to that's the whole comment.
Yes, first reading, we can clean it up
Yes,
before
yeah,
second
yes,
reading.
second reading.
Okay. The only other second comment has to do, I'm on page 7 of 19. This is a pretty handy table that talks about locations where trees are going to be removed, talks about preservation requirements, and then the mitigation standard. So it's a pretty handy table. My question, though, is when you get there, page 7 of 19, this table.
Yes, Exhibit A.
Okay, so under tree removal for construction, all right, under that category, it says within the building footprint of the structure. And it says that must replant trees that are being removed. So I just wanted to make sure that trees that are being removed because they're in the footprint of the structure, which could be a lot, the mitigation standard requires trees to be replanted. And so if you have a heavy forested lot, that's a lot of trees to be replanted in an area that's already forested. So I just wanted to discuss, is that really what we want to do, or is it just something we need to, again, think about?
So that was part of the original tree preservation ordinance part. This is part of a preservation plan they would submit. And it also, the planning director has discretion to modify required mitigation standards subject to the criteria that's developed. And so, and some trees don't count towards that, like pine trees. So there's a number of footprints in those tables.
Yes.
That includes those kind of things.
Yeah, I noticed, and palm trees don't
Yeah.
get included as well. But generically, in my simple language is that any tree, I understand, except for palmettos and pine trees. So any tree that's removed that's within the footprint of new construction, you're going to have to replant elsewhere in the lot.
I think replant is probably, we're not replanting that tree.
Yes, well, the replanting of that tree, of course, I didn't mean to think, my interpretation wasn't that you're going to replant it, but they're looking for you to plant, then, not replant, a brand-new tree. That could be a lot of trees in a lot that may not have space if it's heavy forested. And I understand the need to have the trees, and it's all great. That could be a lot of trees.
That 70% is actually part of the ARB guidelines. That's a guideline component, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just throwing, my question is, I started saying, is that what you really want? And if it is, so be it. But I just wanted to highlight that I thought that's a lot of effort, that's all.
I do think that built into that original ordinance by establishing the board, there is a place to take, if they are not able to achieve that criteria, they can go before the board and say, there's not room here to meet this, and then the board has the discretion to make that call.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, and actually, that goes to my question. I'm glad you brought this up. It says the planning director has the discretion. It doesn't say the board does. And I know the board's supposed to be a quasi-judicial function, similar to the BZA. So should it say the board as opposed to the planning director?
Well, I think it's both. It can be the planning director at site plan approval, and if there's an issue with that, then, and they disagree with the planning director's decision, they go to the board.
My
Kind of
concern.
like a BZA.
My concern is that the planning director has the discretion. I'm not picking on a specific planning director. I'm just saying in general, 5 or 10 years from now, do we want a planning director to have the discretion to modify this? Or do we want, if they don't comply, that they go to the board?
We had,
for
my
review?
recollection, it's been a while since we've discussed this. My recollection is there was an extensive discussion and modifications were made in a couple of respects. One is you will note that there is no planning director discretion for specimen trees. It's only the board. And there used to be the planning director there. I believe that was modified to add the board with regard to specimen trees. And with regard to the planning director's discretion, in the original iteration of this, it was just planning director discretion. Now it's discretion subject to some very specific guidelines and standards.
Now, I would add, just Councilmember Spencer, just the table itself, that last column is respective to which the first column, the location and context of that discretion. So each of those subject matters, whether that's a specimen tree, as the mayor pointed out, whether that's particular location of those trees inside the building footprint or outside the building footprint, that will respond to a different body, particularly the tree preservation board for the substantial trees. So it needs to be read collectively across the table.
Oh, and I understand that. Following up, because that table has a separate criteria for specimen trees, which wants new trees replanted of specimen, protected trees, which are 8 inches or greater, and if you take them down, they have to be replanted or planted. And then it says a generic catch-all, all trees. So no matter what tree you take down within the building footprint, I guess except for palmettos and pines, it's saying you have to replant. And my only point, again, I started the whole point, that could be a lot of trees. And is that what we
But
really
remember,
want?
the all trees is limited to a specific area.
I understand.
Not the lot as a whole.
No, it says within buildable area
No, you have to
and
read-
outside of the building
You
area.
have to read it, the entire table across. So all, the reference to all trees, there's a note where within the buildable area for a certain size tree, 8 inches or greater, then
Yeah.
all trees that are in a certain location, the edge of marsh, ponds, or
Right.
dunes. So there, each respective type and context of tree has a different sort of mitigation requirement that's listed in that far right column.
Right, but each one says, we're getting into the weeds, and you already answered the question. Each type of tree has a mitigation requirement, it must replant trees equal to 70% of the total quantity of trees removed, blah, 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 blah. But the answer I've already heard is that within the discretion of the director, which would be you and/or others, that you wouldn't have to replant new trees if you're in a heavy forested area.
Yeah, and the one thing that the planning commission did recommend at that time was including if you see under the preservation and mitigation standards under that criteria list, that there is a preferred density. So that would be something that's an actual metric that we'd be utilizing as when those things are reviewed, the preferred tree density that is on that lot for proposed tree removal.
And if I can go back to my question, I understand what you said, Mayor Bell. I'm looking at this akin to the BZA. It's kind of a similar kind of function for the LTP. And having sat in on a lot of BZAs and seen community participation in BZAs, I'm concerned that there's not a board function in some of these circumstances where the public can comment and where the public can participate if somebody's bringing a variance into the Landscape Tree Preservation Board, or not being able to do that like they do with the BZA today. And so I'm concerned about community, neighbors, seeing a lot of trees
The Tree
removed.
Preservation Board would be a public body, so it would have to meet in public and provide opportunity for public
I
comment.
understand that. I'm talking about the cases where it's not going to the Tree Preservation Board, where it's going to just the
Just the
planning
planning
director.
director, okay.
Yeah, that's my concern,
Okay,
is that there's not a public forum for that. And I think that the community deserves the opportunity to have a public forum if you're going for a variance, basically, to our standards.
Fair point, and depend on how far you want to go down that path. I would note, for better or for worse, that's the same as exists with regard to the planning director's review of site plans right now. We have required, the town has been putting those on the town's website, but that's not by zoning ordinance requirement. But yes, there legitimately has been a concern about the lack of review of certain planning department, a lack of transparency in the past with regard to planning department reviews, and I think it's a fair comment.
Thank you. And I'm actually saying this in defense of the planning department. Put this responsibility on the board, not on the planning department. It's just kind of where my head philosophically is.
So I have a comment too, and it's really, I'm sort of in agreement with Mr. Berner. That 70% number scares me a lot. And I've talked to both a landscape architect and an arborist about this specifically. And the concern that they bring up is, I think what we're trying to control is canopy. And their concern is they might be forced to plant trees underneath a healthy canopy.
Right.
And the planting of the tree won't survive, or it won't be, it won't do well. And in talking to the two people I talked to, they said, I've had a very good experience with the ARB, and they understand this, and they are very accommodating when trying to modify this. But now you've set up two other hurdles, the planning director and the tree board, that has to have that same understanding and appreciation for canopy and understory and the health of the overall lot. I don't know how to solve that question. If I do simple math, if the footprint is 30% of the lot or 35%, you're supposed to have 70% of the remaining trees. I don't know if that math works, but there are a lot of cases where you probably want to thin trees when you're developing a new lot so that the canopy is healthier and the understory is healthier. So that number makes me nervous in the overall scheme of things in trying to accomplish what the tree board is trying to accomplish. And so I don't know what the solution is. I just know that's a big number, and it's been raised explicitly from two other outside sources.
And I think it's a fair comment. I would note that what the genesis of this was really the flip side of that. The reason a lot of this came up was.
Yeah, I understand.
Was, whether you look at something like the timbers or the Cape and the number of trees that were removed versus was there enough canopy put back? You look at something like the timbers and all the trees that were added, probably half of those are actually pines, it's palms, that only count as a third of a tree, and it would be hard to argue that there are all the replantings of all the native species, hardwoods, et cetera, on that particular parcel. So it's a difficult balancing act.
But if I may, Mr. Mayor, I think for me there, the issue in large part is prevention of the clear cutting, not allowing clear cutting and then saying, okay, we're going to replant and be punitive with the replanting. So because you can clear cut and replant and you're planting small trees or, the total caliber is the same, but you may have lost some of the aesthetics of the large trees that were taken down in the clear cutting.
Well,
So I do take your point.
Well, but to that point, apart from what is required as mitigation, the preservation requirement is, at least with regard to specimen trees, they're prohibited from being removed unless approved. So it addresses at least that issue. Now, whether the mitigation requirement is too much, fair question. I don't have any particular insight to that. I do just note that I think this tracks what's in the Designing with Nature standards now, for better or for worse.
So I take your points, and to that end, you would have thought in the past the ARB would have prevented clear cutting. Now going forward, this is put in to, again, address that clear cutting issue. Then you get to the enforcement issue and the tracking issue and the review of the process. And that part concerns me. Again, they could go through and clear cut. Oh, we missed that, but now they got to plant trees. I want to stop them from clear cutting or, selectively avoiding that they don't need to cut down. And that's the upfront planting, not the after the fact replanting.
Well, again, the preservation requirements in the table are what are designed to address the removal in the first instance. Now,
We have to police that, is what I'm saying.
Oh.
That has to be policed too.
well, and again, you have to have submitted a landscape and tree plan in conjunction with any development other than single family, except certain single family. But this would, for any commercial or other multifamily, would prohibit any removal unless allowed.
Well, the Cape clear cutting probably was prohibited too, and it still happened.
Well, it wasn't.
So we have to be vigilant, I guess is the real answer.
Well, it wasn't prohibited by any town ordinance.
With the ARB.
I'm sure the
Well, that's
ARB
only a
would have said
matter
no.
of,
The ARB still would say they would not have allowed it. But at the end of the day, what Mr. Farrell was saying, all these rules are great. And I guess maybe the answer is we, the town, have to be vigilant. Instead of just trust, we have to verify.
So is this enforced through zoning?
that's exactly why the town started down the path of putting in place this particular ordinance.
So is this enforced through the zoning code compliance process? Is
Yes.
that-
Yes, you would you would have to have an approved preservation plan, and then for the landscape, an approved landscape plan prior to getting a zoning permit. Without a zoning permit, you cannot get a building permit. Without a zoning permit, you cannot clear.
And then Bruce and his team would enforce it in their inspections?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to divert some of my time to Mr. Warren to speak, please.
Certainly.
Does the chair recognize Mr. Warren?
I'm trying to lose weight. I think you'll still recognize me.
I certainly recognize him, and I'm delighted to invite him to the podium.
Since, I sit here very interested listening to this because we are probably the target of this, and target is too different of a word than what it should be. We're the only entity, after what the partners will do down on Beachwalker, that would come under this classification of commercial. So I'd like to do two things. I want to first say how well the town has done up to this point in managing this type of tree process as a person having experienced it with multiple projects. on the island. I'm not quite sure on a commercial project what clear cutting would be. I know you talk about clear cutting at the Cape and clear cutting the timbers, but I would guess and this is my ignorance, I guess it starts with the size of the building, what the zoning allows in terms of setbacks off the edge of the property line. So it allows you a footprint for the building. So what we're talking about is what's left after the building puts up to where trees have to be. Is that a fair evaluation of what this is trying to determine about how many trees, what specimen trees? If I was going to take what we did at West Beach, frankly, when we really thought we were going to build something, and we still will, but we moved specimen trees. We moved 30 specimen trees, big ones with the big tires and all that stuff. So, and I think that was in conjunction with and in discussion with the ARB about what we wanted to accomplish. As a resort, as we build, we're very sensitive to what you're talking about. And I think that if you're trying to put rules in that cannot be broken, as opposed to are we going to design this with nature and with the community and with ourselves, then I understand the need from an administrative standpoint for you all to try to dot all the I's, cross all the T's and everything and make it perfectly impossible to make a mistake. But I think that you've frankly done a good job to this point. I know you want to focus on the Cape and you want to focus on what happened at Timbers, but as the entity that's going to be doing the most, if not all, of the commercial building in the next 10 years, we are a partner in that with you. So I would suggest that don't spend too much time on it. If you want us to sign an agreement going in about what we're going to do, if you're reasonable, we'll be happy to do that. But I think you will. I don't think there's anything unreasonable about this, so I would encourage you to not worry about, and the minute I say that, I know an attorney is going to tell me you can't do that, and another attorney is going to tell me you can't do that. But I think that in this case, I just wanted to make you aware that we support what you're doing. We want it to happen. We want it to be the right way. And so I just felt good telling you that. I don't know.
Great, that's all, that's awesome.
And Roger, do appreciate that. I believe that the structure here allows for that flexibility. It would preclude, yes, certain things from being done, but it provides the flexibility to do what you've always done. Which is what the resort has always done. And I think that is the objective. And I just want to make clear as well that while you are, other than the Kiowa Partners remaining parcels, you have the primary undeveloped property, commercial property or mixed use. This does apply, as Ms. Middendorf noted, to regimes, whether those are redeveloped or not. It also applies to Freshfields Village or any expansion of the town's boundaries at any given future point in time as well.
Mayor Belt, if I can ask, so I don't belabor my point too much more. I realize that there's a lot of brains have been on this between the Landscape Tree Preservation Board and the Planning Commission and John and Petrea and everybody else. If you'll allow, I'd like to just get with John and Petrea between now and the second reading and make sure I understand the decision process on what goes where. I'll be fine for today.
And Mr. Mayor, also, I think this is incredibly comprehensive and really well done. I want to compliment the Planning Commission, Ron Curran in particular, and the others who own the Tree Preservation Board, Larry Iwan, and who's the third that I'm missing? Who's the third? Andy, thank you, Andy Capelli.
And the board's great.
I think there's a ton of work went into this, so I don't mean to nitpick about one or two numbers. This is a really comprehensive piece of work, and thank you.
Well,
And Joanne, thank you.
And obviously, this is just first reading. Changes can be made between first and second reading, and certainly conversation should be had. If there's a view to making substantial changes from first reading to second reading, we may have to go back to first reading again. We'll have that kind of conversation across that bridge when we get to it. But I also want to commend the extraordinary hard work of the staff and the Planning Commission in getting to this place. A lot of work has
the
gone into
Landscape
this.
and Tree
And
Preservation
it
Board.
has gone through some of these, it has gone through an evolution and iteration to try to address some of the comments that have been raised. Not
And the
necessarily
Landscape and
everyone.
Tree Preservation Board, too. There's 5 of them
Yes,
also.
exactly right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any further discussion? I would move, well, I believe we have a motion. I would ask for a vote on approval on first reading. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. The next agenda item is tab 4. It's consider approval of the Barrier Island Ocean Rescue one-year contract extension. To perhaps anticipate a question that may be raised by Councilmember Berner. This came up, I'll allow the Councilmember Farrell as chair of the Ways and Means Committee to tee this one up, since Ways and Means Committee is recommending this to council.
I'm not sure to what you're referring to, but this is a issue to extend a one-year contract with the Barrier Island Rescue. I think we acknowledge they've done a great job. This does not cover enforcement. That'll be something separate. And then we talked about some issues in defining the beach or defining our jurisdictional coverage area. But at the end of the day, the Ways and Means Committee thought this was an appropriate contract and move forward with this. What was I leaving out, Mr. Mayor, that you were thinking about? Where's that at?
No, that's just perhaps to add on to that. So this is not a new RFP. One is not required.
Correct.
An RFP went out in the first instance now 4 years ago. And so this is simply an allowed extension, one-year extension pursuant to the previously issued and executed contract.
Right, the existing contract allow for the extension, or this extension, so yes.
2 1 years.
And this is for the first one-year term extension from February 6th this year until the same time next year. There are a couple of questions, and we actually addressed this a little bit with Rob Edgerton and Michael Sosnowski during the strategic planning meetings. There are a couple of issues where I would argue this contract form is not ideal as written. There's a couple things that ideally we'd have some greater clarification on. But based on the representations of Rob and Saz, they seem to be amenable to addressing those informally. When this comes up for rebid at a future point in time, that would be, in my view, the appropriate time to address those issues, as well as making sure, like this contract, as all our contracts are, conform with our standard municipal form of contract.
And I understand from discussing with you and Rob and others that there is some, not urgency per se, but there is a need to get the contract executed because he has to commence, at this point, the training for the summer season.
That's right. Actually, did I get a motion? I apologize, a little bit out of order here. I would entertain a motion to approve the one-year extension of the Island Beach Services LLC, the Barrier Island Ocean Rescue contract.
So moved.
Second.
Any further questions or discussion?
Just a question for the town administrator. Where do we stand with a contract for purchasing the software and associated stuff for the drone?
Right, for the drone. Yeah, we have not, I think, executed that. Craig, do you know? So we just have to go ahead and move forward with getting that purchased. Barrier Island has not come to us to say, you know, we need this right away, and we just have not purchased. They have the drone, they already have the equipment. This is just upgraded software. We just need to purchase the software. So it's not prohibiting them from running their current drone.
And have we worked with legal to figure out who's going to own the software?
We're going to own the software.
We're going to own it and lease it to
so-
them?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then the third thing is, I don't know if other board members or the public saw the recent video that was posted by Barrier Island Rescue after the storm. But it was a really, really interesting video to watch to see what they could provide us in terms of safety and security after the storm and then what the storm looked like. So if you haven't had a chance to see that, I'd suggest all of you take a look at that.
We
Where
can
would
try to
you
make
go
it
to see it?
available. I sent a copy of that to all of council members. I shared it, but it's not on our website, but we can upload it to the website. But I had sent it out via an email link to all of you guys.
Thank you.
Take the password off.
And I just want to generally, we always, there are often issues with our vendors and service providers that arise. The complaints with regard to Barrier Island Ocean Rescue have been very few and far between. High level of professionalism up and down the organization. Again, there are some things that I think we should tweak going forward, but they provide a high level, quality level of service to the community. And so all in favor of the one-year extension of the contract?
Aye.
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 Thank you. The next agenda item is approval of the proposal for the leisure trail projects on Kiawah Island Parkway and Beachwalker Drive. Mr. Oh, yes.
Come on up, Brian, you can
Yes,
come on
there's
up.
another recommendation, I'm sorry. That is the item, Mr.
I'll
Chairman.
talk while Brian walks up. This is another recommendation from the Ways and Means Committee to approve the paving of two sections, or really 2.5 sections of town-owned bike path. So the first section is along Beachwalker Drive, and I'll let Brian talk about the details about that. The second portion is 2 sections along Kiawah Island Parkway. I think we all know there's 2 sections that get flooded pretty badly during rain or high tides. And this is a proposal to mitigate those 2 issues by tearing up what's there, regrading and raising, and then repaving.
Yes, sir, that's right. So just to anybody that didn't listen to the Ways and Means Committee meeting, we released an RFP to do this work. We received only 2 bids back, talked to 4 different companies, but only two bids came back. Both very qualified bidders, had conversations with the offerer that we're recommending today. And again, qualified to do the work. He'll be able to get this done ahead of the spring season before it starts to get too busy. Should be pretty quick. And again, both sections have the similar issues, water retention after heavy rain, and then also just natural wear and tear, cracking and roots busting up the asphalt there. So those obstacles are going to be eliminated once we get this paving done.
I would entertain a motion for approval of the contract with Proper Paving LLC.
So moved.
Second?
Any further discussion or comments?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. How long would the process take to dig up and replace? And will there be diverted traffic from, during that time?
Second question answered yes. And then according to the proposal, the work will take between 8 and 10 days to do both areas.
And where will be the diverted traffic?
It's the details about that are going to be worked out. We'll have further conversation about it, but one option is to kind of create a barrier to on the road for peds and bikes to go around. It'll be a barrier, very visible, cones, rope, whatever it is, just around whatever area they're working on at that time. And if that's not the route that we want to take, then they've got other traffic control options that would come in as a change order.
Could you just shut down any traffic on the bike path for those 8 to 10 days?
We'd like to try to not, if at all possible, because, I mean, it's February right now and the weather's great, so we want to keep that bike path open as much as possible. Worst case scenario, maybe that is what we would do, but we're going to try really hard to not do that.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yes,
Did
ma'am.
we talk about the third section of the trail?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
All right, so I have many problems with this, and I strongly urge this not be approved. So the public understands what's going on. The recommended low bidder is $129,820. The only other bid is literally more than twice as high, $282,569. In my construction business, I had a lot of road contractor clients. So background information. There's not much you can do in road work where you can shave money off your bid because the supply of asphalt is going to come from only one or two plants, so the price of materials is very, very narrow. Milling machines are only able to mill so many feet per hour. That's a given number. Paving machines have the same issue. They can only pave so many feet per hour. There's not a lot of variability of how you can bid projects. So with that being the basis, it's my experience that on road projects, which are just mill and fill, as I talk about, they're all within 5% of each other in bid numbers. This is more than 100% off. Let's talk about why it's like that. One thing is our ordinance, section 4-406, requires, paren E, requires a tabulation of the bids so we can compare the rates. That tabulation probably exists, but I don't have it, so I cannot approve it. Secondly, you get to 4-406, paren I, that refers to reasons why a bidder would not be a responsible bidder. I states that if the number and scope of quote-unquote conditions are large. This is a situation where we're being set up. If you go to the proposal, whenever I review bids on a project for road work, always, 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 you look at the unit rate for asphalt or anything that is pretty much going to be fixed regardless of who the bidder is. So we have a number here of 3.78. So we don't know what the other bidder is, and I wish a bidder's unit rate was, and I wish we did so we can identify that, as well as to confirm that the quantity is the same. But the conditions that are a subject matter of paren I that I just talked about, for the asphalt, he is saying it's excluding, these are the conditions, the tack coat, the prime coat, grading, base repairs, which I can understand, permitting, testing, traffic control, bonds if we need it, and I must add, if he's excluding grading, he doesn't have this in his exclusion, so he messed this up, he then obviously can't include compaction, because if you grade, you have to compact. His bid is low because he's excluding all these things, and he's setting us up for a big change order with a high markup. That's the setup. And I know that because that was the business my firm was involved with, how contractors try to screw over owners. And this is a real basic thing that they try to do. Similarly, under milling, he doesn't have the cost of milling any concrete pavement, which I'm not sure there is any there, but he's also excluding traffic control. Traffic patrol is expensive. So the bottom line is, I'm not sure he's really the low bidder. He's certainly not responsive because of all these exclusions. I strongly urge we reject this and go back and do a more vigilant analysis.
That's why we have an engineer on the town council to educate us about these issues. So Brian, just a couple things I would note, and I don't know if these are apples to apples and with regard to the exclusions. I would hate to characterize that we're being set up. Now, whether this appropriately captures all of the necessary, well, the only thing I would observe is part of what we discussed at Ways and Means and part of determining whether in fact the bidder was qualified is that both we and Seabrook have experience with this particular bidder. Now, I believe that with regard to our project, there was no major change order subsequent to what, so they did all of the work back find where all the installation of the EV stations was. I can't speak for Seabrook other than they did leisure trail work on Seabrook, and Brian did get references. Stephanie may be able to provide, she did a little bit earlier, a little bit of history about the other bidder that accounts at least in part for the delta that exists, that they apparently have a pattern and practice of bidding extraordinarily high. In some cases, they're the only bidder, and then maybe you can whittle them down. One of the things that was also done is compare and contrast to know that that bid was very high is we have, this is 700, about 3,000 feet total. They had, for not much more than this bid, they did 3/4 of a mile of beach walker leisure trail previously. They started out, I believe, very high on that one and then came way down. But they're bidding almost as much for about a third of the length of the same kind of work as they did for, so that doesn't completely account for
I
the
understand.
low end of proper paving. You may raise good issues that I can't address.
But you know change orders are coming because he's excluding the tack coat, the prime coat,
that may be legitimate issue. I'm just
I
saying.
know they're coming.
The degree of the gap is probably a little bit of both ends.
Very well may be. I can't help analyze this if I don't, unless I have the other bid and we can compare the unit rates and the quantities.
I'm happy to provide that information to you to review. If I can speak to a few of those exclusions, I did talk to him about that. The tack coat and the prime coat is not necessary for a leisure trail as it would be on a roadway. The grading, we can get this in writing too. It's not full depth grading, it's surface grading that he would be able to do, which is what we need to do to get the water off of the bike path and flowing the correct way. So surface grading is something that he'll be able to do. And then testing, that's a proof roll that they would be able to do afterwards.
It's still a cost that's
Yeah,
not in there. And you do,
Well,
and
the
you still
proof
should
roll
have a
that
tack
they've got-
coat. You
that-
still
that
should
they've
have a
got
tack coat.
The machine already out there that, comes behind and smooths over the asphalt. That's what they would be using.
Then one would ask, why is he specifically excluding testing? He's looking for a change order already. The reason why.
I can't answer that question.
I can tell you, I've had so many clients that tell me they win bids because they put in all of these exclusions for things that they know they have to do. And so the bid looks artificially too low, and they know they have to get a change order subsequent to contract award to add those things back in. That's the game they play.
But he addressed tack coat, prime coat, and grading. So the
Well,
issue is testing, how much do
I
you think?
don't, I do not agree with respect to the tack coat. You still need a tar adhesive kind of layer if you're just going right on top of dirt. Now, if that's what the design spec for the job stated, then I would have a problem with the design spec, but
Well,
regardless.
So if I may, sorry to interrupt you, to remind you all, this is a design build contract. So they will be required to provide a design that we will review and approve prior to construction starting.
So then if you say you need a tack coat, like I'm saying you need a tack coat, change order. I'm telling you, this is, I use the word set up intentionally.
Well, I certainly respect your concerns, and I do think that we can get those questions answered if we were to move forward today before we were to enter into a contract with them.
I can't approve this, and I won't approve it.
So what were, any of those issues arise when we contracted with them to do work here at the municipal center?
We didn't have any issues with them when they did the work over there.
Any change orders of any magnitude?
No, sir. And to be honest with you, they actually went ahead and did a little bit extra work since they were already out there, installed that little drain to go off the back for water to run out that way. That wasn't part of the scope.
And you indicated that they had done leisure trail work at Seabrook. You checked with Seabrook, your counterpart at Seabrook, and
Yes, sir. I called the reference. They just did a multi-use path for Seabrook, for the town of Seabrook, in December, this past December. Called the reference. He had only great things to say about working with proper paving.
Talk about True Luck for a minute. Why is their bid so high? Do they want to work? Are they just bidding high? They don't want to work, or what do we know about True Luck?
Kind of to what Stephanie brought up at the Ways and Means Committee, sometimes they come in a little bit high initially, and you know, if they're the only bidder or we already have a contract and we're working with them, we can talk and negotiate, but we don't have the ability to do that without being impartial to anybody else that's bid on the project. And as far as their numbers go, can't really speak to why there's a big discrepancy from line item to line item. Could be overhead, could be, you know, a couple different things, but.
now, one thing, Councilmember Bernard, that we discussed earlier today, and actually the recommendation to the council from the Ways and Means Committee was modified at Ways and Means to allow for a change order amount up to $30,000 that I and the staff would have authority to review and approve. If there was anything more than that, would have to come back to council. Now, to be fair, that wasn't simply to accommodate, I mean, it wasn't didn't contemplate specifically these things. In part, it was to address that the scope of this project was the leisure trail from Freshfields Village to the Old Cedar Lane, I believe, and that, as Councilmember Farrell had noted, there was about, I don't know, a 50 or 100-foot section of the leisure trail that was not within the scope of this project that tends to flood, not as badly, but tends to flood closer to the bridge. So to be able to accommodate and add that to that as well. So we do have a process for allowing for change orders, but capping that without coming back to council.
Yeah, what you're discussing is a scope addition, which is different what I'm saying. These are exclusions.
Yeah. It would allow for some, because it's not, we don't believe, based upon the bid, at least if there was any accuracy to the bid of 130, that adding 50 or 100 feet would necessarily get you anywhere close to $30,000, but there is some latitude.
No, well, I mean, I voiced myself, and I don't have to repeat it.
The only other issue I would note that is if we, you know, part of the consideration here with timing is the work needs to be done, particularly this stretch from KIRE entrance to Bobcat Lane is in very, very poor condition. You've seen that.
Yes.
And the work needs to be done. And the part of the timing consideration is to try to get all this work done before the.
I understand. So I'd be all for having more due diligence. I'll sit down, meet with Brian, and/or make proper phone calls, and we can have a special call meeting to deal with just this one item in 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever. But, you know, it's a democratic process. You guys vote the way you want, and I've already told you I'm voting.
I'm supportive of this contract based upon the representations of the staff with regard to their prior experience with this contractor, not kind of bait and switch and references to Seabrook. But I also don't have any problem if you guys are amenable to a special call meeting to take this up, and defer it now, but in a special call meeting within 2 weeks, it would still allow us enough time so you could sit down with Brian to make sure we nail down these specific issues. I'm certainly open to that.
Let me ask you a question, Mr. Mayor. I mean, Brian, in light of what Councilman Berner said, do you have no concerns, moderate concerns, major concerns about this bid now?
I don't. I mean, initially, the discrepancy between the two raised some eyebrows. But I had a thorough conversation and meeting with the president from Proper Paving yesterday to make sure that we both understood each other. After we talked here at length, we went out to the Parkway, walked the scope area, went down to Beachwalker Drive, walked that scope area. There was nothing that made me think that he might have underbid. He was confident in his bid.
And let me be just a little bit specific. So maybe outside the scope of traffic control, kind of the grading, the backfill, the tack coat, none of that stuff gives you any real problem based on your experience?
No, not based on my experience. And again, tack coating is something that's standard when you do it on roadways, but leisure trails, you can get away with a little bit less effort because there's no impact effectively on the leisure trail. So, but to your concern, Mr. Berner, be happy to.
You should have a tack coat, especially when you're going from dirt to asphalt. You really do need the intermediate.
Well, and we can absolutely have a meeting. If the three of us met and he could answer your questions and maybe even say, sure, we'll put tack coat in, and, just so that everyone's happy, at the end of the day, be happy to arrange that meeting.
Did we add tack coat to prior leisure trail projects?
Not to my knowledge. On the roadway, yes, but not to my knowledge on the leisure trail.
I also appreciate Councilman Berner's experience and insights, so thanks for bringing that up. One thing we did talk about at Ways and Means that I don't think we covered here is the traffic control, and we did discuss that, what did you say? Will you describe what you told us, Brian? 1,500 a day? Or?
I'm sorry,
He talked
I missed
about
the
that
end
in
of
the
that.
Traffic control?
Yeah, so
Councilmember Kay answered.
Okay.
Yeah, we would essentially create a little cyclist and ped lane just for the length of wherever they're working at that time, to make sure that they're not going in the street without any type of barrier or anything like that, or indication to motorists. But that's just one option. We could do other options if we were more comfortable.
So to move this forward, my own bias on this is to go with a 2-week delay so that the concerns that Councilman Berner has brought up are addressed. And if they are then satisfied after your meeting, then I'm all for moving forward with the project. But I do think that you raised some really very legitimate concerns, and I'd like to hear them. I think it makes a lot of sense to have that meeting.
I would be in the same place, Mr. Mayor, in deference to Mr. Berner's experience. I think it's worth he and Brian meeting with the contractor and walking the site and going through the questions that Councilman Berner has. So I would agree with Ms. Kay.
Okay, who made the motion? Would they, I can't recall who made the motion to approve, and then perhaps withdraw that motion, and then would make a motion to defer consideration? Who did?
I'm sorry, I don't
Was it-
recall who made the motion originally.
We don't have clerk here as to who made the motion to.
Well, if, in the event that I did, I'll retract it.
I think I might have done it
I
as
think it
Ways
was
and Means
moved.
Chairman, so
Yeah.
Okay.
I will remove my motion.
Withdraw
and-
withdraw your pending motion,
Yes.
and then I would entertain a motion to defer consideration of this agenda item until a subsequent likely special call meeting within approximately 2 weeks' time.
Now, I'm so move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. We move to the committee and board appointments. It's been just note at the outset that I think we'll take these one at a time. And I would note at the outset that there's been a lot of community interest in serving on our boards and committees, which is, I think Stephanie would tell us, has not always been the case in the past. In many instances, we got far more qualified applicants than there were positions on the committee. But these are, as we noted, for one-year terms. There's always going to be an opportunity for those who are interested in serving to be able to do so. And so this is going to be an evolving process. I would first like to move approval of the Arts and Cultural Events Council committee member appointments. I have a motion.
So move?
Second?
Discussion, I will start the discussion. As you recall from our last council meeting, we kind of restructured, reconstituted the Arts Council a little bit. I am the council member who chairs the Arts Council Board. The subordinate body is the Arts and Cultural Events Council. It is chaired by David Wool. I don't know if we have anybody from the Arts Council here. All of the current committee members indicated that they were interested in continuing to serve. We had only gotten one additional indication of interest. Actually, I don't think they ever formally submitted an application, and I think part of the reason why is they were informed about the extraordinary amount of work that goes into this particular committee. And as I've said before, I mean, I hope the community really appreciates how much time and effort these volunteers to put on into the work of this committee on our behalf. They spent 2 or 3 kind of full days going through the planning of the season. And then with regard to every single event that's held, staff members from the town as well as volunteer committee members are involved in staging, taking tickets, directing people to seats, doing announcements, and then disassembling everything. So it is truly a working committee. So it's my pleasure to put forward for the council's consideration all the council members noted in tab 6. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Chairman of the Audit Committee.
So the Audit Committee, I was incredibly pleased. There was a huge, at least in terms of Kiowa, a huge number of folks who wanted to participate on this committee. Unfortunately, none of the standing committee wanted to re-up. I don't know if that's a reflection on me, or reflection on them, or reflection on something else, but that was a bit disappointing.
It may be a reflection of the fact that I think you signaled that this was going to be a working committee as well.
Well, that may have been the case, and let me talk about that just a bit. So the good news is we've had a great group of folks who wanted to be on this. The bad news is I lost a lot of institutional memory, but with one exception. And what we talked about in all of the discussions with folks was kind of the expanding of the charter or expanding of the scope of the audit committee, where historically it had been a function where they really focused on the integrity of the town's financial statements. And if you look in our charter, there's really kind of 4 things. It's integrity of the financial statements, it's integrity of the system of internal controls and risk management, it's the compliance with legal and regulatory requirements and ethical standards, and then engagement, the quality of the engagement of the auditor. And I think we'd done 2 of those really well, and 2 of those we hadn't really tackled. And in my time on the council, and with a lot of prompting from the mayor, we was suggested that we really look at the internal controls. And so as we set out, we talked to everybody and said there's going to be a little bit more requirement than just 3 meetings a year that we have. Yeah, 3 meetings a year. We probably meet twice as much, and there may be some subcommittees formed to do some work. Maybe that scared some folks away. But with that, we had really a long list of qualified folks. And from that list, I'd like to put forward Peter Ashton, Paul Kurth, Bill McDonnell, and John Wilson. And I'm going to go in reverse order just to talk a little bit about their qualifications. The one that was, I won't say most pleasing, but very pleasing, was Mr. Wilson. He was formerly on the audit committee. He was the one who stood up the audit committee back when it was originally stood up. And he's tremendous experience both in Kika and the financial side of Kika. And he was also a Town of Kiowa council member. He was chairs of the Ways and Means Committee. He was a founding member and chair of the Audit Committee. So he brings a great amount of experience back to the Audit Committee, and I was very pleased to have him as one of our nominees. Mr. Donovan, he was formerly president of United States Steel and Carnegie Mellon Pension Funds. He's got great experience in long-term planning of asset studies, working with accounting departments on book assets and liabilities and expenses. He's got experience in improved controls. You know, having managed a lot of money internally, controls are a big deal for an asset manager or a pension fund manager. And he served as an analyst in his prior life and supervised selection and implementation of portfolio management systems as part of his. So from my standpoint, he had a lot of experience on systems, on process, on internal controls. And he comes to us with a Juris Doctorate degree from Duquesne with a focus in taxation.
Mr. Chairman, I would note Mr. Donovan was
was
with
here.
us here a little while ago.
The third person I want to talk about is, talk about John Wilson, Bill McDonough. Let me do Peter Ashton, sorry. He's an economist. We had several economists, and they had varying different backgrounds. But I felt that Dorada and I both put these nominations together, felt that he probably had the best background from an economist standpoint that we'd want. He owned his own business. He had a significant amount of work involving financial statements and auditing, both auditing and unaudited. He was chair of an audit committee for the most recent board he served on. And he's got a tremendous background in finance and accounting. And again, as I mentioned, he served on the audit committee. He's got a graduate degree from Columbia. And while I have a lot to say about economists, he was one who was the most concise and direct and had the most relevant experience for what we're looking for. And I do want to say one other thing, Mr. Mayor, is as part of this, I talked about the roles. One thing I really want to look at is, again, as we talked earlier, is our investment process too, and understanding investments. And in that case, both he and Mr. Donovan are going to bring some experience to us to maybe further set up an investment committee that is actually formalized rather than the informal one we have today. So I was thinking about that as part of this. And then the last person is Paul Kurth. He's a partner with Ernst & Young, over 37 years of experience. His consulting practice was on regulatory, quality, and risk management issues. He ran the national office. He's got human resource responsibilities. Again, he did analytical research. And he did research to identify audit quality themes and trends. So again, it seemed like a good fit. He was a member of the Center for Audits, Quality, and International Practices, and he was chair of it for 3 years. He also has a master's in business administration from Bowling Green, and he's a retired CPA in the state of South Carolina. So those four members, I think, are going to give us great experience both in the audit of financial statements, audit of internal controls, and then looking at ethical standards and audit there in terms of our internal policies and practices. So with that, I offer those four nominations for our audit committee.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
I just have a question. I recall somewhere in the past, you mentioned, I forget something about we need background checks. Do we still need to do that for committee people?
Employees.
Employees only?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, there's the I-9, you got to, what may have mentioned is at least part of that is there are several documents that are required by federal law with regard to anybody able to do work in the United States right now. And we implemented a process in the last year or so to make sure we were complying with those types of regulatory requirements. There are some others as well.
Okay, not for committee members, though.
We don't have any, we don't have, I mean, they are subject to the state conflicts of interest statute
Right,
as
of
well
course,
as
for that.
our gifts policy.
Right.
But nothing beyond that.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to confirm.
Environmental Committee.
Okay, so We, at the time when I polled all of the standing members of the committee on whether or not they wanted to re-up for another year, we were in the middle of some of the more controversial topics that we've tackled, including the whole dog leash issue. And I think, you know, this is probably a clear signal of the difference between you and me, Luke, but they all wanted to re-up with me.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure there's an underlying theme there, yes.
Anyway, I want to thank those folks. It's been a really interesting year on the Environmental Committee, and so for all of them to want to re-up, they've had to do some work that I think they didn't anticipate doing, and they've done a good job on it. I'm going to give Jordan a lot of credit for running a highly functioning committee, and then the members of the committee for the diligence they've shown and their willingness to come back and do it again. We've got one change just on the kind of the Maze of K side, and that is Jennifer Hayes is replacing Tom Emanuel. I don't know why that's on there. We'll have to fix that. And then we have two new members that we've added, Bob Martineau and Fran Williams, and both have got some pretty impressive experience. Bob is currently on the Marsh Management Work Group, so he's just going to be moving over, but he's got a law degree, and he's been practicing environmental law for the last 35 years. He was general counsel for the U.S. EPA for 7 years. He served 7 years as the cabinet officer for the governor of Tennessee over the Department of Environmental Conservation. So clearly, he's got a lot of experience. And he has also, he's wanted to become a little bit more involved from just the marsh management side, but as I mentioned earlier, we are kind of restructuring one committee into two, and he probably will be on the resiliency side of things. And the second person that we're adding is Fran Williams. Fran also has got extensive experience. She was the Vice President of Environment, Safety, and Health for a nuclear facility in South Carolina. She was involved in cleaning up radiation and contamination issues, so she has done some of the dirtiest work in terms of environment. And very enthusiastic and a good team player and a real willingness to dive in and do the work. So I'm thrilled to have both Fran and Bob as new members of the committee. We have several other very, very well-qualified people who applied, and I'm sure that we'll be able to use them in the future. So I guess I made.
Any discussion,
Any
question?
discussion?
Did we move those appointments? You're
don't
moving
think
those
so.
I'm
appointments, is
moving
there a
those
second?
appointments.
Second.
Yeah, second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Councilmember Spencer, Infrastructure and Public Works.
As I mentioned in my opening comments, we're a newly reconstituted, reimagined Infrastructure and Public Works Committee. I wondered at first if we'd get any volunteers, and I was pleased to get the slate that we got that volunteered. Ideally, we wanted a 5-person committee plus Brian and me, and we got 5 great volunteers. Brian and I met with them. And one of the more important criteria is, are you willing to work? And they all said yes, so that's good. And appreciate people's willingness to do this. Some pretty amazing backgrounds. I'm not going to go through individuals one by one, but we've got experience ranging from career at the Environmental Protection Agency and building out major infrastructure projects for a very large company in Florida that owns a lot of real estate, and working on ecosystem restoration and stormwater issues. We have a resident from Cassique, and somebody asked me about this yesterday. We decided to open up, number one, do you want to volunteer and are you qualified? And Cassique has a stake in decisions and actions taken by the town. This person did live and vacation on Kiowa, but has since bought in Cassique, with a strong financial background, which actually may be very helpful when we start thinking about ways to fund and capitalize some of the more ambitious infrastructure projects we've got coming. We have 2 former KICA board members that volunteered. People with construction and law backgrounds, particularly focusing on construction, real estate, and infrastructure type law, which I think will be helpful. One of our candidates has worked with the state of South Carolina and knows how to navigate a lot of the bureaucracy up there, as we may need to engage with them on various issues and maybe grants and other kinds of approvals as those might come up, working with DES and others. So Brian, I met with everyone. We like the slate that volunteered, really appreciate them volunteering, and so would like to include them all in the committee. The next challenge, of course, like some of you others have talked about, is we're going to figure out how to address our workload. The mayor gave us a long list of initiatives, and we had a few more as well. So we'll have to figure out how to divide and conquer and come together and conquer on some of these based off skill sets and people's desires on how they want to participate. But we've got a good slate that volunteered, and I really appreciate it.
Motion to approve the new Infrastructure and Public Works Committee members.
Motion.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Next, Planning Commission. I'll take the Planning Commission. Under our town ordinance, in contrast to the other committees, the standing committees established by the council, the Planning Commission is a statutory committee under both state law and under our ordinance. Our ordinance provides that the mayor makes the appointments subject to the advice and consent of the council. We put together a committee comprised of council review committee, council member Farrell, and I don't know that he's here, Larry Iwan, who was then the vice chair and is currently now the vice chair of the Planning Commission, and also assisted by the planning director. Like everyone else, we got more candidates than we had slots available. Very, very strong candidates across the board. We had a consensus of the committee members with regard to the 2 candidates being put forward by the council, forward to the council, Sandy Devine and Mary Beth Schmerzel. So I would entertain a motion for approval of those 2
So moved.
committee members.
And second?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Public safety.
Okay, so that's me. I was very lucky that everybody on the board wants to stay. So there are no new openings available to be filled. Everybody has been there for multiple years, and I really like the fact that Freshfields is involved, and Kiowa, the golf resort, is involved. So we really have a good cross-section of the people who are on the island. So I don't have really anything else to add. These are all qualified people, know the ropes, and they should all be here for a new term.
Entertain a motion for appointment of the Public Safety Committee members.
So move.
Second?
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. State Tax Committee.
All right, Ms. Kay, the State Tax Committee, they all wanted to stay, so it's not necessarily just me.
It's a wash.
And we have a very strong State Tax Committee lineup as it stands. We did have an outstanding candidate that many of you may know, Lauren Beadle. He's a longtime property owner here on Kiowa. He is an owner of 6 businesses in Freshfields. Some are hospitality restaurants, some are retail. I think he will claim to be one of the original investors or renters at Fresh Fields. He's been there 20-plus years. He owns 48 Wine Bar, restaurants, Seacoast Sports, Kiowa Spirits, Kiowa Wines, a couple others. He also owns retail stores in Chicago. He's got a BS in accounting from Miami of Ohio. And importantly, he's a retired partner from Accenture. And so very strong leadership skills from that. And he's always had a retail focus. And so I really wanted to find a place for him because of his hospitality involvement, because of his participation in Fresh Fields for such a long time, and importantly, that he's a property owner. And as I looked down the list, there were some people there that absolutely had to stay. And again, this was kind of a blessing in disguise. It's a wealth of talent. And so where it came down to is David needed to stay because of his Arts Council representation, which is legislated in the State Tax Committee. Roger Warren, Don Simler in particular, had to stay because of their hospitality, specifically in lodging. And then Steve Ellis and Kelly Sachs, again, hospitality more broadly. But then Kelly and Jody Rush were property owners. And so it came down to Amy Anderson, who was not a property owner. She didn't have direct experience in hospitality or leisure. She had some marketing experience, which was excellent and helped us think about kind of when the Charleston City Visitors Bureau talked about their metrics and using the internet. She was very helpful in that. But at the end of the day, I think Lauren's skills outweighed hers. And so we're replacing Amy Anderson with much regret with Lauren Beadle as the new person on the State Tax Committee. And again, I want to say both here, the candidates we had both here and for the audit committee were tremendous. The participation previously from the folks who were on the audit committee and Amy's participation has been tremendous. And I can't thank enough both groups of people for their desire to help us do what we need to do. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to put forward this list of candidates.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Wait. I have a question to council.
Okay.
I love everybody on the list. We have a representative on this list for the State Tax Committee that's from the Kiowa Island Golf Resort who receives money and the NDLN. I have no problem with them being on the list. I want to protect us from the conflict of interest policy.
As long as they recuse themselves on matters dealing with their entities, they're fine.
Which they do.
Okay.
Which they do.
Okay, I just wanted to put that out there, fine.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
And in our case, it's kind of difficult to avoid because as Councilmember Farrell noted, the state accommodations tax statute requires that 4 of the 7 members be from the hospitality industry and 2 be from the lodging industry.
Okay,
So we don't have a
not a big-
lot of latitude
yeah.
in the composition, but yes.
I just wanted to throw that out
It's a
there.
good question. It comes up, like 3 council members for different municipalities have asked that exact same question.
Okay, great.
And again, they do, it's an easy process. They always do recuse themselves.
I'm sure they will. They're all professionals. I just want to make sure we're not messing up. So.
All in favor?
Aye.
Just want to make one last observation about the committees generally, and for the benefit of the broader community, to understand that there are 2 different types of appointments that we're making on committees and boards. 3 of our committees, the Planning Commission, the Board of Zoning Appeals, and I think we'll have somebody coming up in a subsequent council meeting, and the State Tax Committees are what is referred to as statutory committees. They're committees that are empowered under state law, state statutes, and statutes govern some of their activities and to some extent the construct of those committees as well, just like we just talked about with regard to the State Tax Committee. The we have ordinances that apply to some of those, as well as charters, which go beyond requirements or maybe differ from the requirements of the state statute, which, as I understand it, is okay as long as it's not inconsistent with the state statute. For example, the Planning Commission, because this has come up, there's been some confusion about the Planning Commission, and particularly what arose over kind of last month, is the Planning Commission statute, the statute that addresses, the state statute that addresses planning commissions, only specifies that council members, the commission members, be members of the community. It does not specify the number of members, and it doesn't specify the terms. State statute is silent on that. What it does say is the planning commission members organize themselves and establish their own rules and procedures. So this body, and I'll get to the standing committees in a minute, can't set the rules for the planning commission. By statute, state statute, they set their own rules. Now, our ordinance does specify 4-year terms for the planning commission. That's not required or specified in state law. We could ultimately change that if we wanted to do so. But that's what's in our current ordinance right now, and that's whether that's something we want to look at going forward or not, I don't know. I will just put it out there. The terms so when the terms begin and end isn't specified in state law, but it's not prescribed to have terms set at a specific time. So basically, all our terms have been going from January 31 to January 31. There's been some confusion around that. Now, get to the standing committees, all the other committees, the non-statutory committees, those are simply a creature of the council. We can do whatever we want with those because those aren't matters of state law whatsoever. But all our charters now specify 1-year terms. We discussed whether audit committee might be one of those that, for which a longer term might be appropriate or not. We can certainly revisit that at another time. But what I think is extraordinarily refreshing with regard to all of these is the number of applications we got, people who are willing to serve on all these committees, which I think is, again, stark contrast to years past when it was tough to find people to fill the committee slots. And it's a reflection of extraordinary engagement on the part of this community right now. Open it up to citizen comments on any agenda item.
Mr. Mayor, before you do that,
yes.
may I one other comment too? All the other standing committees, this caused a little bit of interest or frustration on the part of some people. All the standing committees, as the mayor said, have a 1-year term. And this term, we probably were more active in reaching out and seeing who wanted to stay on, seeing if there were volunteers, seeing if there were maybe fresh faces we wanted to bring in that would be additive. If anybody out there is surprised by this, it probably wasn't exercised, this due diligence wasn't exercised as much in the past as it was this time. But several of us took this to real heart to make sure we looked at our committees and looked sure that everybody wanted to participate, they were participating, and were there better people out there that could help us, do the things where we want to stretch. So if anybody was frustrated by that, just know that's been in place. It just maybe wasn't exercised as diligently in the past as we did this time.
Well, I think it's probably fair to say, Stephanie has more institutional knowledge in this regard than certainly I do, that the past practice had been simply, if you wanted to stay on the committee, there were no committee slots open. So there was nothing advertised. This time we indicated that basically at least every standing committee, a committee that was created or chartered by the council was available. Certainly didn't preclude current members from staying on. But yes.
And that approach by not advertising and open up also caused frustration among community members. So there's never a place for me to volunteer. So hopefully we've reached a place where everybody understands that we do want volunteers. If you want to volunteer, there are always positions open. And if you want to stay, please say that you want to stay on, because if you're providing great support, that's needed as well.
Thank you. Ms. Medendorp?
Carol Medendorf, Parkside. I went to the town hall last time and have some questions, I guess, about the funding, with the excess money in the funding. You called it unrestricted funds, or you called it unrestricted revenue, but then there's that tax money talked about. So I guess my question was, when you presented an idea for using some of that money, is it restricted at all? And if it's not, is there a way for the community to have some involvement in what they think is needed as far as extra things for the community? And whether that be a survey or something, or at least tell us how we can give our ideas, because we have some good ideas. So I just wondered about that and how to go about that. But we kind of need to know the funding question before we present our ideas.
Excellent question. I may have spent too much time or too little on that at the town hall meeting. But as I noted then, we do have somewhat of a unique set of revenues compared to many other communities, and we have a unique balance sheet compared to almost any community. Our revenue sources are 43% of our budgeted revenues are from restricted sources. And that's just from the budget standpoint. Now, those restricted funds have to be used, that means they are used for, can only be used for restricted purposes. And those purposes are under the state ATAX statute. I went through those. Those well line up with at least, I'm not sure, the local accommodation tax, one of the other taxes, plus county, but county approves and may not give us anything. But there are restrictions on what those can be used. Then we have unrestricted revenue sources, some of which come from accommodations and hospitality taxes a little bit. The most are things like business fees, development fees, business license fees, development fees, trash management fees, et cetera. We're going to separate out the operations from the balance sheet, which is the nearly $43 million, which continues to grow. I don't have the charts right in front of me, but about 22 million of that is just general fund. Cash is unrestricted.
Right.
Another, I think about 8 million, and certainly Dorota can correct me if I'm wrong, about 8 million or so is in our capital fund, but it is also unrestricted. So,
And that's where you also indicated that we're insured for our replacement of.
Well, all our capital assets,
Yes,
the
are
issue is
insured.
at the end of the day, what are we saving for that rainy day?
Right.
So we need to understand kind of what, the worst case scenario, if we had to rebuild and replace everything, what would that cost? So that was part of that discussion. We have our only assets are this building, the contents of this building, some vehicles, et cetera, 3 miles of road and a bridge. That's the entirety of capital assets. What we do know, but we're going through a process of assessing, and that will be led by the audit committee and working with the finance director staff, is that this building is fully insured for full replacement costs. So even if you had tornado, flood, fire, earthquake, whatever, and this building was leveled, we would not have to use our general funds necessarily to rebuild and replace that. It would be insured, but we're looking at the exclusions and everything else. Roads, our engineer, council member says probably $1 million a mile. So $3 million to replace the roads if we had to do so. A not insignificant cost, and cost associated with if the bridge went out. We're going to do further assessment of that. That is insured as well, but there would be some cost for having a temporary. So it's trying to understand all that. But that is, the capital, the funds that are designated to the capital investment reserve fund are not restricted. They don't have to be spent on those things. We also have a separate, do we have a separate beach renourishment? I can't, we have a separate beach renourishment fund as well. We have a beach renourishment project that will be upcoming. We're in the permitting process right now for the eastern end of the island. Estimate is 700,000 plus or minus, hopefully less for that. The largest, most expensive beach renourishment project that's ever been undertaken here was about $3.5 million. Really big storm, it could be more than that. We have monies reserved for that, but continuing ATAX funds can also be specifically used for beach renourishment. Then.
And that's restricted funds.
What's that?
Those are restricted funds that we would use.
Well, we have a separate unrestricted beach renourishment account, a fund that is not restricted. Yeah.
No. So the money that goes into this capital project, capital reserves comes from restricted funds. The council designated 20% of hospitality and local accommodation tax. So they are designated and they coming from restricted fund.
So the capital, how much is in our $8 or $9 million?
Yeah, about 8.6.
So, and what is in our other, so what's in the other $10+ million? I thought there was a separate about $7 million of ATAX restricted accommodations tax fund.
Correct. So we have, it's about 9 million. We just look at this, and this is local, state tax, hospitality, and county accommodation.
So those
taxes.
those have to be spent on the permitted tourism-related activities.
Yes, sir.
So what's in our beach renourishment fund has to be spent within 2 years?
No.
Then,
No,
so it's unrestricted.
I wouldn't call it beach renourishment. We created this fund
That's right.
for the future capital projects / beach renourishment.
That's right.
So
But it's not restricted.
it's coming from restricted funds. It's just every year we transfer 20% of those local and hospitality, and this is designated. Just to move it from restricted, take the restriction completely of it,
So
and
it's a way
it's
to save it
designated.
past 2 years,
So,
if we designate it.
No, we can't save it past 2 years unless we specifically designate it for a particular project and get approval. Pardon?
it's not state accommodation, it's a local and hospitality.
So it's, I'm sorry, okay, so it's it's all the other funds other than the.
Yes, but it's not, I would not call it unrestricted. It is designated to those, to capital projects / beach renourishment.
So it is still restricted to be utilized for either the enumerated 8 or 9 different enumerated tourism-related categories that are listed under state ATAX fund. One of the accommodations or hospitality tax has a very similar list. It's not identical.
Correct.
So we still we're continuing to roll those funds over, basically, because.
Yes.
So just interrupting, but bottom line is, there is quite a bit of unrestricted money that the members of the community should have an opportunity to share somehow with all of you, ideas as you presented one.
So what are some of those ideas?
What?
What are some of those
An
ideas?
indoor pool would be one. I know we have an 8-second rule to get into water aerobics at the moment, that if you don't push your finger on in 8 seconds, we have no access to a pool. Whereas, well, a public pool, how it's worked out, I mean, that's a whole different story. Indoor pickleball courts, again, things that we don't currently have. Your idea, there are places that we could still have those events, whereas some of my ideas there aren't currently that's not available to have for the community members. So,
Well, certainly it was the beginning of a conversation. Part of it was just about part of what I had talked about at the town hall was better utilization of the municipal center complex. But yes, as I noted there, even if we would build kind of the conceptual presentation with regard to the wing here, that would not necessarily involve reducing our reserves by a penny. That would still, because you could finance it, and the financing could be paid through future accommodations taxes. So that still leaves availability for the funds. The issue ultimately becomes, and again, it's part of a conversation, and that's why we want feedback. We will be doing a community survey in the ordinary course. We've done that last year. Maybe we want to move that up a little bit, but we're also constrained by not so much the amount of money that we have, but if you're talking about physical infrastructure, where to put it.
And who uses it. But yes, the short answer to your question is, we will definitely survey the community for ideas about capital projects.
great.
Thank you, Carol, for mentioning that.
The short answer.
Yes, Maura.
Carol, with the understanding they can't be behind the first gate, or it's very difficult. Okay.
Understandable. There's no room for us to do that in the first place, so we need to come somewhere else, right?
Maura McIlvaine, 146 Blue Heron Pond Road. On Carol's potential pool, I would only remind everyone, this building's on a septic field.
Yep.
So putting a pool, I think, has some complications in a septic field situation. But that's not to poo-poo it, just there's some considerations on that. And maybe the mayor can work us forward, as he said he might be able to get us to sewer connects.
Well,
Maybe. I said maybe.
I think he promised that.
I only wanted to say that, having spent time here at the town strategy workshops for 2 days and the town hall, I very much appreciate the work all of you are doing and staff is doing. It was a huge undertaking to have all the staff at the meetings and presenting, and I very much appreciate that takes months of work to get it lined up. And the substance, if anyone didn't attend or didn't get to watch any of it, please do. You really learn a whole lot. I mean, I have sat in this chamber. I sat here when the last budget for this year was being passed. And I watched council being told, oh, just drop one revenue item and we're really close to being, negative. And it was very dire. It was, there was so much hand-wringing during the budget presentation last May. And we got $43 million that we never knew we had. It's just refreshing. So I stand to commend all of you and all of staff who made it possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Maura. Any other citizen comments? Council member comments? Councilmember Berner.
I don't have any, thank you.
The legal fees are driving me crazy. Is there a way we can, I know, never. No comments.
And they're only going up. Councilmember Spencer, I have no further comments at all. We are adjourned. Thank you.
All right, the sun.